Hello and welcome to my International Stuttering Awareness Day presentation for 2013. My name's Grant and I might have actually met some of you out there, but I won't hinge on that too much. I'm the Discipline Coordinator for Games, AI and Multimedia at the University of Ballarat in Australia. Today's presentation is going to be revolving around the idea of the use of games to help facilitate therapy and support for children who stutter. I won't keep this presentation very long, but you of course can read the paper, and you're welcome to contact me at any time also. So I lead a research program called TEPS, which is the Technologies for Empowering People for Participation in Society. Basically what we do is we think up, we make, we test, basically software for people in need. Now what we don't do is we don't prescribe what that need necessarily is. So we try to make the platforms as wide as possible to as many target audiences as possible also. But again, I won't harp on about this too much. So, today's discussion is revolving around electronic games and game theory for supporting therapy and, importantly also, the confidence of children who stutter. It's really about time that we start taking games seriously. They've been around now for a long time in some form, at least since like the 70s. People have now grown up with them for over 30 years solid. They're firmly indentured now in families also. So, you may say games. We will be focusing on electronic ones. Games, are you serious, Grant? Well, yes, I am. Games have been around now for a very, very long time, as I explained earlier. They're almost in every modern family unit now in some form. In houses, on tablets, on phones, PCs, consoles, electronic games, or video games, as some people may actually know them, are around now in a very heavy and serious fashion. It may surprise people that the games industry now makes more money than Hollywood per year. It gives you some sort of a sense of the impact of it. They do sell a lot of games and various bits and pieces around games, software and both hardware. They are no longer the single domain of kids. It's why we have to start taking it seriously. Even though today's talks focus around children, adults now are firmly playing games, and actually the average age of a gamer is actually closer to that of a well-established adult. And the current generation that is now growing up are termed quite heavily as digital natives. They are used to electronic technologies, but more importantly, they expect it now in everyday life. Look back at some kids now. They'll be at school using tablets or PCs to do their work on, lectures, watch movies, etc. Then they go home also. They might be on their smartphone, their tablet, their PC, their gaming console. They may have been driven home using some form of GPS. They're almost, or some children are almost always connected in some form. So, let's quickly talk about the demographics of games. There's a lot of surveys which are basically conducted every year, and most of them are similar in what they actually find. In 2012, the Electronic Software Association did a survey, a very large one, and what they found was at that point in time, which is somewhat consistent with others, the average age of a gamer was around about 30 years old. 30 years old. It may shock some people, but not that surprising really, because if you think about the costs. You know, games cost, you might be spending $40 on a game plus. People around about 30 may have more of that disposable income. There's almost a 50-50 gender split also. So in the old days, most people saw games as being mostly male orientated. Not so anymore. Now, I won't get into the discussion. Different genders seem to favour different game types though. And what they also found was 62% of gamers who play online play with others. So there's a sense of community there also. And 40% of them play games with their kids. So, average age for a lot of people gaming, but this survey at least has shown that 40% of these people play with their children on a regular basis. Bond University, as part of their Digital Australia studies, which I think they do basically every 2 years, in 2012, found in Australia, 92% of Australian households have a device which is capable of gaming. Again, it could be tablet, smartphone, PC, you name it, but 92%. So, this is getting serious. 92% of families are gaming functional and capable. 83% of parents who play games, 83% of parents play games, which is also a pretty strong figure. 88% of those 83% play on a regular basis with their kids. So they're sharing time with the kids in some game-based form. These are pretty strong figures, especially when it comes to a family unit gaming, at least in Australia. So, I propose then, and again, this presentation is really just to seed ideas and thoughts. That speech and language pathologists and related professionals should start seriously considering the use of gaming in their practices in some form. So it's really just to seed some ideas. And I know there's already some work starting to happen around the world, but I think it's time to start taking this very seriously and very honestly, because there's many other discipline areas doing the same thing, considering gaming in a very, very serious fashion, especially in terms of support. So, we have some different ways of thinking about this. And again, I've just refined it to a very, very narrow list. We can use existing games, which are already out there on the market, and somehow inject them into therapy and support. We can possibly make our own games to do the same thing. So maybe not off the shelf, maybe we think of our own games to actually do this for us. Or we could implement a methodology, I guess you could call it, called gamification, which I'll explain later. And as I say here, kids already game so much. Now, think about the times where you've maybe got home, this is talking to parents, where your kid's on the couch playing games, and you come back later, and hours later they're still playing games, and you might, tell them off, you might restrict them in some fashion. Let's put this in their head. What if your child, who's maybe stutters or got some other speech issue, is spending that amount of hours playing a game which is assisting them in some form in terms of their speech and their social confidence? I bet then you would probably not want to restrict that time as much. You wouldn't be walking past your child and going, oh, he's playing again. You know, it's been 2 hours on the same game. If it was assisting them in some form, and maybe not overtly even, I bet you'd be letting them spend a lot more time on it. But that's part of what we're going to quickly discuss today. So, the use of existing games, off-the-shelf games, games which somebody's already paid for to be made, to be marketed, and attracting a wide market. That is a somewhat interesting way of approaching it first, because the game's already been created for us. We don't have to go to that expense and time to actually make it, fund it, etc., and then put it on the market. Thus, if we use an existing game, it could be cheaper for us to implement of a course and also faster, because it's already made, it's already on the shelf. But will it suit? That's a problem. The challenge then is trying to think about how these existing games actually suit what is currently done. Some examples here. We've got Sam and Max, the Disney Infinity, and the Cooking Mama 3. Sam and Max is a classic example of almost like a point and a click style narrative story game. So you're progressing through the story, there's all different narrative texts there, you can click on objects, you can interact. It's basically a interactive story. How I would envisage something like this being used is where perhaps the child and the parent or a parent are working through this game, which is fun and enjoyable and even funny, because it actually uses a lot of humour. And at the same time, they're discussing things. They're building up their own narratives around what they're actually playing through. And for children learning some form of speech modification technique, they can practice that at the same time, with the encouragement of other family members there. I think that's a pretty good idea. The same can be done really with any of these games here. The Cooking Mum. They're playing these little mini games, and again, they can discuss what's going on, they can laugh about it, they can joke, they can build narrative stories around what the game's actually doing. I think that's a pretty powerful form. Now, and I know it's probably done already in some other form, but why not use these interactive stories in a sense to actually help? And as I've already discussed this really, it's encouraging the parents and the child to participate as a family unit, while at the same time possibly encouraging the good use of technique, not being shy, and being more overt in their nature also. So it's really constructive for all actually, because we're probably spending more quality time with kids too. Now, the second way then of using electronic games would be to create our own games. These will be, though, time-consuming and expensive, because we've got to think all these ideas out. We've got to find somebody who's got the skills to actually make them, and that can be a very expensive venture. The one thing going for it strongly is, though, we can tailor-make the game to suit what we actually want. We don't have to try to fit what we do to an actual game. We can fit the game to what we want to actually do. Again, I'll take careful thought, the planning to make sure that it suits what the aims and goals of it actually is. But really, this is where SLPs and game designers could actually join forces too. Especially if the game can possibly be marketed wider than a very narrow band of simply children who stutter. So a carefully constructed game which has a market beyond the somewhat small target market. And again, some games companies out there at the moment, at times, are actually struggling to find work also. So these other projects may actually suit them at times also. So now I come to an interesting one. Why not then, if we're going to create games ourselves, why don't we then create a game with characters who actually stutter? Perhaps a main character who stutters. And depending on the focus of the game, it could be the focus in it, or it could be just the main character who jumps around and explores things and solves all these puzzles, just happens to stutter. It's not focused on. But the child playing it is seeing a positive stuttering role model, and they're developing a story through that. So it's just some examples of some avatars, some main characters who perhaps just happen to stutter, you know. But that's just an idea of mine. So, stuttering characters as heroes, positive stories. You know, again, they may just happen to stutter, but positive stories which perhaps these characters work through in some sense, which then they become themselves positive role models. You know, and the child probably enjoys going through these stories and really connects in a deep fashion to these their characters who they're actually intending to actually be. It would be also really cool to be able to give the child the ability to customise what they actually look like also. So then they can almost create themselves, in a sense, into the game. Another way also is to say, well, if there's a virtual world, a game that they're playing, why not make it somewhat realistic also, where at times there are negative reactions to everyday experiences in terms of their stuttering. So it to sort of help prepare them more for the big wide world and to help them understand it more, what they might be possibly facing as they grow older and they interact socially a lot more. So as I said, it could almost mirror the real world in some form. And at the same time, they can discuss what they're actually playing through with parents and peers in some form too. So they get to talk about those experiences in a very, very constructive fashion. Now we get to gamification. So put aside using existing games or making games. What gamification revolves around is basically using game theory and elements of games outside of a normal games-based environment. It's actually a little bit hard to explain in some ways, but say using game mechanics and techniques to encourage, to motivate and excite participation and learning in the real world. Employing game concepts to business education and support, and normally involves a sense of community in some form, which is good. We want to build community, of course, as much as we can. So it's theoretical somewhat, but we can also build electronic platforms into it, such as websites, and that's what I'll be talking about mostly next. So imagine some sort of website, some sort of online portal where SLPs and parents that could lead their children who stutter into these portals. They register, sign up, they can possibly customise what they actually look like. They could possibly then, in real time, depending on what the portal is, interact around the world with other kids who actually stutter. So each with their own physical avatar or how they actually look on screen, but they have engagement and they form communities then of engagement with other children who stutter. Of course, it would have to be heavily moderated and stuff like that, but would have to be thinking around other ways to manage that. Imagine then a virtual world, a community. We could somehow allocate the children virtual rewards in some fashion. And again, we'd have to think all this out. But perhaps the SLP, every time they meet, they talk about what the child's been up to over the last week, and then maybe set some goals, or maybe the child's actually set their own. And then they get to be allocated points of some fashion online. So some examples here is leveling up on the bar. So they can see how far they've gone in a certain way, and that might be different stages, different levels, etc. And also rewards of some fashion. They can be allocated by a parent, by a speech professional, or they can be seen online. So the child gets used to this, being able to advance, being able to win things and points and stuff that they can somehow spend in a virtual sense. But what could be really cool is if we could, in this sense of where there's lots of different children there at all different times, others can possibly see what you've actually earned too, and what, say, rank you are, how many worlds you've possibly been through, what sort of ribbons have you won in some fashion. So, a single virtual point for these children, and users are of course verified in some fashion, so we know that they are truly who they actually are. They're registered. You can have leaderboards, discussion boards, forums, all these different things in the one point. And that could possibly be for both children and parents. You could have distinct areas in the one spot. So parents and SLPs can give rewards, and we're building heavily upon a sense of community and possibly even competition also. But we could give the children goals or quests. People love quests, especially kids, being able to achieve, read through the story, being able to get that chapter of the story done and have some sort of reward for it. So for example, these quests do not have to be in-game. So we've got the portal, which may simply be a community and a way of showing how the child's going, giving them points and stuff like that. But outside of this environment, in the real world, in the sense of the physical world, we could be giving them quests. I'll give you some examples here. Practicing their tech make every day for a week. The parent might say, that's worth so many points, or I'll give you some gold, and you can go and spend it in some fashion in the actual game itself. Perhaps the child participated in showing the tell, or perhaps they made a phone call of some form, something that they may have not really been happy to do in the past. We can reward all these things. We can set our own goals. We can have a common set there, but we can also customise things quite easily. Then again, if you think rewarding interaction, that's what we're doing. We're saying technique, but we're not always focusing on technique, of course. It might simply be what comes from it, the confidence, interactions, etc. That we want to reward, and others can see that these other people have actually done these things. And then it's like, well, I want to be as good as this guy, and I want to gain more points. How will I do so? Well, you've got to go through these quests and stuff, allocated to you by your parent or your speech professional. Online can also be cooperative. So perhaps we can think of exercises where kids, it's geographically dispersed, can somehow form teams and somehow have a common quest or goal. So they're working together, they're communicating in some form, and they're earning rewards also. And then, of course, they're getting to know other children who stutter too. So to them, the world isn't so small then. So working together in quest of the teams, and of course socialising with others too. So I'll actually end it there, but we can talk about this for a long time. In conclusion, these are just concepts at the moment. Okay, so I'm just putting out some seeders, some ideas out there. And if anybody has any questions or things to ask me to discuss, please contact me. My contact point will be on the website. Thank you all.